My name is Zoe Merritt. I am 31 years old, and right now the woman standing at the head of my aunt's dining room table, the one my mother has been name-dropping for the past 40 minutes, is holding a glass of Pinot Noir and looking directly at me. Not at my brother, not at his fiancée, at me. She set down her wine, tilted her head slightly, and said in the kind of voice that does not need volume to carry, "I'm sorry, I don't think we've been properly introduced. What is it you do?" My mother had just finished telling the table that I worked in marketing. "Support work," she said, "mostly internal, very behind the scenes." The woman waiting for my answer is Dr. Helena Voss. She holds an endowed chair in structural engineering at MIT. She has consulted on 3 federal infrastructure projects in the last decade. She is the mother of my brother's fiancée, and she had been watching me for the better part of an hour with the focused, patient attention of someone who already knows the answer and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. I thought about smiling and letting my mother's version stand. Then I didn't. To understand how I became the daughter my own parents introduced in passive voice, you have to understand what I call the trophy wall. Growing up, our living room had a long stretch of white wall beside the staircase. My parents hung things there the way other families hang art, deliberately, with intention, in a specific order that communicated something about who mattered in that house. My brother Owen's Little League trophy at 10, his JV football photo at 14, his varsity letter at 16, his state championship plaque at 17. And me? My mother hung one thing from my side of the childhood, a group ribbon from a 4th grade science fair, the kind they gave everyone in the top half of the class, pale yellow. Participation adjacent. It was positioned at the far left corner of the wall, half behind the coat rack, so that, if you were standing at the bottom of the stairs, you had to lean around a jacket to see it. I was 12 when I noticed. I didn't say anything. I just started working harder, quietly, the way you do when you understand that volume is not going to get you anywhere. I tested into a magnet program for math and science in middle school. My mother attended the enrollment ceremony for about 11 minutes before she had to leave. Owen had a scrimmage. That was fine. The scrimmage mattered. I got it. At 15, I won a regional robotics competition. My father shook my hand in the parking lot and said, "Good job, kid," which was genuine and also the entirety of it, because they'd booked a celebratory dinner for Owen that same evening. He'd been accepted early to a Division II football program, and that news, arriving the same week, eclipsed mine so completely it was as if mine had not happened at all. I ate a sandwich in my room and read the acceptance letter from the robotics club, inviting me to nationals. I went to Purdue on an engineering scholarship. Mechanical engineering. I did not tell my parents about the scholarship amount for 3 months, because I knew what would happen, and what happened was exactly what I knew would happen. My mother listened to the number, was quiet for 2 seconds, and then said, "Owen's coach thinks he might go pro." Owen did not go pro. Owen tore his ACL junior year, transferred to a smaller school, switched his major to sports management, and is now a very decent assistant athletic director at a mid-sized university in Ohio. I say that without any edge. He works hard. He loves his job. The lie was never about Owen. The lie was about what my mother built around him, and what she quietly demolished around me to build it. After Purdue, I went straight into a graduate program at Georgia Tech. Aerospace structures. I defended my master's thesis at 24, got hired by a federal contractor outside of Washington, D.C., and spent the next 6 years doing structural analysis on components for NASA's Artemis program. That is not me being dramatic. That is the sentence I have had to practice saying out loud, without my voice going flat from years of swallowing it. My mother told her book club I did data entry for the government. I know, because my cousin texted me a screenshot. She'd overheard it at a luncheon and thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. My mother had described my career to her friends, her neighbors, her church group, as computer work. Mostly just inputting numbers, very routine. One of her friends had patted my hand at Easter and said, "I think it's really nice that you found something stable, honey." I smiled and said, "Thank you," and drove home with both hands gripping the wheel too hard for the entire 2-hour trip. When I pushed back once, gently, privately, at the kitchen table, my mother looked at me with something that might have been pity if it had more self-awareness behind it and said, "I just don't want people to feel like you're showing off, Zoe. Nobody likes a person who makes others feel small." I had not made anyone feel anything. I had simply described my job. "Not everything is a competition," she added. She had spent 31 years turning my existence into a competition with my brother, and somehow the note was directed at me. I moved to DCC. I stopped explaining. I stopped mentioning bylines. I'd started publishing technical articles in a peer-reviewed journal in my late 20s. I stopped forwarding news coverage when projects I'd worked on were announced publicly. I stopped calling home after professional milestones, because the silence on the other end, or the redirect to Owen's life, had a texture I couldn't absorb anymore, without it changing something in me I didn't want changed. The trophy wall went on without me. 8 months before my brother's engagement dinner, I attended a conference in Boston. Panel on Advanced Materials in Aerospace Design. I was presenting, not attending, presenting. 15 minutes into the Q&A, a woman in the second row asked a question about fatigue failure modeling that I answered for about 4 minutes straight, without notes, because I'd spent 2 years inside that problem, and I knew its edges the way you know the layout of a house you've lived in. After the session, she introduced herself. Helena Voss, MIT, she said. That was the clearest explanation of composite stress modeling I've heard at a public panel in years. Where did you train? We talked for 40 minutes. She missed her next session. I didn't realize who she was. Not fully. Until I Googled her on the Amtrak home and sat there in the quiet car with my phone in my lap, thinking about the specific way this world is sometimes very, very small. I did not tell my mother about the conference. I never did anymore. Owen got engaged in January. Her name was Petra Voss. I was happy for him. Genuinely. Petra was warm and direct, and laughed easily, and clearly made my brother steadier than he'd been in years. The engagement dinner was set for April, at my aunt's house in Connecticut. My aunt Sandra, my mother's older sister, had the kind of home that was both beautiful and slightly intimidating. The kind where the tablecloths matched the napkin rings, and there were multiple forks, and you were expected to know what each one was for. My mother called me 3 days before. I need to go over a few things, she said. Which is never about a few things. She told me to wear something understated. She told me not to talk about work unless asked, and if asked to keep it brief. The Voss family is very accomplished, she said, in the tone she reserved for people she found both impressive and slightly threatening. I don't want anyone to feel like you're trying to compete. I almost laughed. Instead I said, what would I be competing in, Mom? You know what I mean, she said. And the sentence closed the way her sentences always closed, with a weight that assumed I would comply and carry it without complaint. I drove to Connecticut on a Saturday in April, with a blazer in my back seat that I'd worn when I gave a keynote at an industry symposium in February. I hadn't planned to bring it. I grabbed it off the hook by my door at the last minute without really thinking about why. And somewhere on 95 North, I understood. It was armor. Not aggressive armor. Just the kind that reminds you who you are when you walk into rooms that try to tell you otherwise. My mother answered the door before I knocked, eyes on my outfit, inventory completed in about 1 second. You look fine, she said, which from her was not a compliment and both of us knew it. Help Sandra with the centerpieces. And remember what I said. The guests arrived. Owen and Petra, who hugged me at the door and said, I'm so glad you're here, like she meant it. Petra's parents. Her father, a quiet man named Douglas, who shook hands with both hands, and seemed genuinely kind. And her mother, Helena Voss, who walked in wearing a charcoal blazer and immediately made the room feel more organized just by being present in it. My mother introduced me while steering the group toward the living room. This is Zoe, our daughter, Owen's older sister. She's in DC. Government work, data processing, very routine. She laughed lightly, very behind the scenes. Helena turned to look at me. Something happened behind her eyes. Not recognition, not yet. More like the beginning of a question she hadn't finished forming. Dinner was my mother at her absolute peak. She orchestrated the whole table like a conductor. Owen's highlights, the engagement story, Petra's decorating plans for their apartment, Douglas's gentle anecdotes redirected gently back to Owen whenever they drifted. Every time the conversation tilted my direction, she intercepted it. She sent me to the kitchen for water. She asked me to check on the bread. When Douglas asked what area of DC I worked in and I started to answer, she talked directly over me to tell an anecdote about the time Owen visited me and got lost on the metro. I watched my bread roll for a minute, then Helena set down her fork. She didn't tap a glass, she didn't stand. She simply stopped eating and said, clearly enough that the whole table recalibrated toward her, Zoe, I have to ask you something, and I apologize for interrupting the flow of conversation. She looked at my mother for exactly 1 second, a polite but absolute look, and then looked at me. We met at a conference in Boston last fall. You presented on composite stress modeling. I've cited your explanation in 2 lectures since then. A pause. She let it sit there. I'm trying to understand. Your mother said you work in data processing? Every fork stopped. My mother let out a short, bright laugh. Oh well. Zoe's work is quite technical. I always have trouble explaining it. Helena did not look at her. What exactly is it that you do? She asked me, with the quiet directness of someone who has run faculty committees and federal consultations and simply does not have time for the other version. I thought about the bread roll. I thought about the trophy wall. I thought about the yellow ribbon behind the coat rack, and the phone call I didn't make after my first publication, and the Easter table and the woman patting my hand and saying, it was nice I'd found some stable. I'm a structural engineer, I said. I do aerospace structural analysis for a federal contractor. Most of my recent work has been on NASA's Artemis program, specifically composite load-bearing components. I've also been publishing in the Journal of Structural Engineering for the last 4 years. The table was quiet. My mother fumbled with her napkin. She always undersells the data side of it. Douglas looked at my mother with a pleasant expression that contained absolutely no warmth. You told us she did data entry. I said data processing, I think. You said very routine, Douglas said, still pleasant, still without warmth. Those were the words. We asked about her before dinner and you said very routine. Petra turned to Owen. Her voice was calm but her eyes were sharp. Did you know she told my parents that? Owen looked at the table. I didn't know she said that specifically, no. She told me Zoe had some struggles professionally, Petra said, that she'd had a hard few years and it was a sensitive subject. She turned to me. I am so sorry. I believed her because she said it quietly, like she was protecting you. Owen set down his fork. Mum, I was protecting the evening, my mother said. Zoe's career is not dinner conversation. It makes people uncomfortable. My Aunt Sandra, who had been silent at the far end of the table since the bread course, set down her wine glass with a small, deliberate click. The only person made uncomfortable by Zoe's career, Linda, is you, and I think we've all watched that be true for long enough. She looked at my mother steadily. Long enough. My mother's eyes filled. I don't know why everyone is making me into the villain of this evening. Because you told the mother of your son's fiancée that your daughter, who works on space programs, does data entry, Sandra said, very evenly. That is not protecting anyone. That is editing a person out of her own life so the story you tell is the one you prefer. Helena reached into her bag and produced a card. She stood and walked to my side of the table and placed it next to my water glass. I'm on the board of a fellowship for women in aerospace engineering, she said. We review applications in August. Your work is exactly what we fund. I'd like you to apply. My brother looked at me across the table for a long moment. He looked older than he had at Christmas. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I should have said something, he said quietly. Not tonight, before tonight. A long time before tonight. I always knew she did it, and I told myself it wasn't my place. But it was. You're my sister. Petra looked at her mother, then at me, then at my mother. I need to understand what I've been told about this family, she said carefully. Before we go any further with any of this, I need to understand that. She looked at Owen. Can we have that conversation? Privately and honestly before we set another date? Owen nodded once. Yeah, we can do that. I stood. I folded my napkin the way my aunt had taught me when I was 7, diagonally with the crease pressed flat. I put on my blazer. I looked at my mother who was looking at the table. I love you, I said. I've loved you my whole life in the specific, exhausting way you love someone who keeps telling you that being yourself is the wrong answer. But I'm not doing it anymore. If you want me in this family in a way that is real, it has to be with who I actually am. Not a version of me that fits better beside Owen's story. Me. She didn't answer. My father, who had said almost nothing all evening except to agree with whatever my mother said, looked up from his plate. His jaw moved once. He looked back down. I walked out. I drove south on 95 in the dark, with the radio off, and somewhere around New Haven I started crying. Not the ugly kind. Just the release kind. The kind that means something has finally been said that sat in your chest so long it calcified. And by the time I hit New York the road was clear and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was traveling in the right direction. There were 11 messages, by morning. My mother, in 4 separate texts, escalating. The first was wounded, the second was accusatory. The third brought up the fact that I'd embarrassed her in front of people she had to face again. The fourth said, I hope whatever point you were trying to make was worth it to you. My Aunt Sandra, you did exactly right. I'm proud of you. Call me when you're ready. Petra, late that night. My mom hasn't stopped talking about you since we left, in a good way. I want you to know that I didn't know what she'd been told. I'm so sorry I didn't ask more questions. Owen at 7 a.m. I'm sorry, Nat. I don't know what else to say yet, but I mean it. And one I didn't recognize. Helena Voss's personal cell number, which apparently she had given Owen to pass on to me. The message said, Douglas and I were genuinely confused tonight. I hope you're okay. The fellowship deadline is August 15th. Please apply. Your work deserves a room that knows what it's looking at. I met Helena for coffee 6 weeks later, at a place near Union Station that she chose, because she had a congressional briefing in the afternoon and needed to stay downtown. She ordered black coffee and a muffin she didn't eat and she said, Your mother has a gift for making things smaller than they are. I've met people like that. They're usually afraid of something, though that doesn't make it easier to be their daughter. She's been afraid of something my whole life, I said. I just never knew what. What do you think it is? I thought about it. I think she built her identity around my brother's trajectory and didn't know what to do with mine. Mine didn't fit the shape she'd made for it, so she made a different shape and put me in it. Helena nodded, and the shape was smaller, always smaller. She drank her coffee. Well, she said, you don't fit in it anymore. Anyone in that room could see that. Owen called me 3 weeks after that. Petra and I have been talking, he said, about a lot of things. About how mom treated you growing up. I told her some things I'd watched and never said anything about. He stopped. I watched a lot, Zoe. I didn't understand it was something I was supposed to say something about. It was how things were, I said. That's the problem. I know, he exhaled. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm starting there. We talked for an hour. It was not easy, and it was not clean, and we didn't solve anything. But it was real, and that was new enough to matter. My mother called on a Thursday evening in June. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with, I've been thinking, which from her usually precedes a reframing. But what came next wasn't that. She said, I talked to Sandra last week, and Sandra was not kind about it. And I'm not going to pretend she was, but she wasn't wrong either. A pause. I think I've been telling a story about you for a long time that wasn't true. I think I started it because I didn't know how to explain what you did to people who wouldn't understand it, and then I kept it going because, I don't know, because it was easier. Because I'd already said it. I sat very still. I don't know exactly what you're working on, she said. I realize I've never asked. I've listened to you talk about it and I've nodded, but I wasn't actually taking it in because I'd already decided I didn't understand it, and that was the end of it. A longer pause. That wasn't fair. I'd like to try to understand it, if you're willing to explain it. It was not the apology I'd imagined at 22, at 25, at 28, in the car after every dinner where I'd been erased into a quieter version of myself. It was a 61-year-old woman on a Thursday evening saying out loud that she'd been wrong, which is a smaller thing than I'd wanted, and also in some ways, a harder thing to do. If you want to try, I said, we'd have to start from the beginning. I know, she said. I drove back to Connecticut on a Saturday in late September. No occasion, no family gathering. Just my aunt's house and a pot of soup she'd put on before I arrived, and the particular quiet of a house where someone has been waiting for you, not anxiously, just steadily. After lunch, I stopped in my aunt's living room. She had photos on the wall above the console table. Family pictures spanning about 40 years. I scanned them slowly. There was one of my mother and Sandra as teenagers, one of Owen at a Little League game, one of me at my graduate hooding ceremony, which I'd sent to my aunt because she'd asked for it, and my own parents had not attended. They'd had a prior commitment, my mother had said, and I'd said, okay, and I had understood then, as I understood now, that some things do not change quickly, and some do not change at all, and what you do with that understanding determines a great deal about the rest of your life. But there was a newer picture, recently framed, and it was placed at the center of the arrangement. Me at the symposium in February. I didn't know where my aunt had gotten it, probably from the event's website, but there I was, at a podium, in the blazer, with the kind of expression I had when I was actually in the thing I was built for. Front and center. No coat rack, no pale yellow ribbon wedged into a corner. My aunt came in behind me with 2 cups of coffee and stood there for a moment. When did you put that up? I asked. February, she said, same week. I looked at it for another moment. Thank you. You don't have to thank me, she said, and handed me the coffee, and we sat down, and that was all she said about it, which was the right amount. My mother and I are not healed. I want to be honest about that. We are in the early part of something that may take years, and there are still conversations I leave, feeling like I translated myself into a language she only partially speaks. But she asks questions now, about the work, about the projects, about what it actually means when I say I'm doing structural analysis on a payload system. She doesn't always follow it. Sometimes she asks me to back up and explain a term. She does not redirect to Owen. She does not make it smaller than it is. Last Thanksgiving she gave a toast at dinner. She mentioned Owen and Petra, who had quietly set a new date for the spring. She mentioned my Aunt Sandra, and then she looked at me and said, and Zoe, who works on things I am only beginning to understand, and who is more patient with me than I deserve. It was not the acknowledgement I'd needed at 12 or 20 or 25. But it was real. And it was at a table, out loud, in front of people, and she did not take it back. If you grew up in a house where your achievements were kept in the corner behind the coat rack, I want you to hear this. The instinct to keep making yourself smaller, so the people who love you don't have to feel uncomfortable, is not loyalty. It is erosion, and it happens so gradually that sometimes the only way you know you've been doing it is that one day someone asks you a direct question about who you are, and you have to stop yourself from giving them someone else's answer. The night Helena Voss looked at me across my aunt's dining room table and asked what I did, I almost let my mother's version stand. I almost smiled and said data processing and let the moment move past. What stopped me was not bravery, exactly. It was just the specific exhaustion of having been wrong about myself for long enough. I knew what I was. I had always known. The only thing that changed that night was that I finally said it out loud, in a room where I'd been told to stay quiet, and every room after that has been easier.